Thank you, Lori, and to the entire East Hampton Democratic Committee. Welcome, everybody, to our educational forum, our public schools. So my role tonight is going to be as the moderator. So there are a few things I'd like to tell you about before we start. On each of your chairs at the beginning of the program, make sure you're not sitting on one of them, there's a question and answer sheet. And this is an opportunity if you have a question that you wanted to ask that we could address later to fill it out. And Chris Capucci, who is going to be our first speaker, at each intermission between speakers, will be going back and forth to collect any questions that you have. Now, you may just be here for information and you don't have a question, and that is fine too, but we would still request that you put down your email so we have a way to contact you as things move forward and you have more information. So, as we begin, let me tell you a little bit about Chris Capucci. Chris has his bachelor's degree in political science, and he has worked for the past 4 years as a legislative director for a state representative. What Chris is going to be speaking about tonight is the history of our schools, and actually it's entitled Free Public Education for All, Our Commonwealth's Greatest Accomplishment. So I welcome to the podium Chris Capucci.
I was told not to touch this. I think this is good. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Are there any history teachers here? Everything you're about to hear I learned in a history class in a public school in Massachusetts, so thank you. A lot of you might not know this, but Massachusetts is actually the birthplace of universal public education. Were it not for the efforts of Congressman Horace Mann, the United States would not enjoy the benefits of universal and comprehensive public education. Under the leadership of Congressman Mann, Massachusetts, our Commonwealth, implemented the most important and progressive reforms to education in all of history. Using the Massachusetts model, universal public education for children and teens spread to the entire country and then to the entire world. Public education is not only Massachusetts' greatest gift to the world, it also stands as our Commonwealth's preeminent legacy and perhaps our greatest political, economic, and social achievement to date. Massachusetts residents are proud to have made the Commonwealth the home of many important firsts in the global public education movement. We are home to the first Board of Education, the first free public schools, the first laws directing cities and towns to hire a teacher, the first law banning racial segregation in schools, the first law guaranteeing all students with special needs the right to a free and appropriate education. And last but certainly not least, we had the first law professionalizing the teacher by the creation of state-supported normal schools. Horace Mann, as a state legislator in 1837, worked to found the nation's first Board of Education, which resulted in a doubling of state expenditures on all education statewide. He went on a statewide tour, ultimately ending up in the Berkshires. He actually left Boston and went to the Berkshires to figure out what was going on. There he saw firsthand the serious inequalities in the Commonwealth's school systems. His experiences encouraged him, upon his return to Boston, to call for a statewide system of taxpayer-funded common schools. He argued that these schools should be open to all children, girls and boys, and completely free of charge. This, he said, would make the common schools, quote, the greatest equalizers of the conditions of men, end quote. His idea became so popular that it took hold in most communities across the Commonwealth. This created the need for a professional teacher in each community. And in 1838, with just $20,000 in funds, it was a $10,000 state appropriation and a $10,000 private donation, he created a system that was for, and I quote again, qualifying teachers of these common schools. These became the Massachusetts Normal Schools, which were founded between 1839 and 1894. They were, in order, Lexington Normal School, which moved to Framingham, the Barry Normal School, which moved to Westfield, the Bridgewater and Salem Normal Schools, the Massachusetts Normal Art School in Boston, and finally the Worcester, Fitchburg, and North Adams Normal School. If these locations are ringing a bell, these became our state colleges and universities, MCLA, Westfield State. In 1839, We were the first there. These schools were coeducational, and as a result, more women than men joined the teaching profession in an era when educational and professional opportunities were severely limited for them. In 1839 in Massachusetts, you had these options for education. You had the two normal schools, and you had the Mount Holyoke Seminary and the Wheaton Seminary. So we were ahead of the game. Due to the widespread success in Massachusetts, every other state adopted similar models. And today, Massachusetts has the most stringent standards in the country for training traditional public school teachers. We've been doing it for 180 years. Our greatest policy achievement to date has beaten the expectations of anything Horace Mann could have dreamed of, while the country may lag behind global scores in education of other developed societies. Massachusetts public school students rank 8th in math, they rank 9th in science, and 4th in reading proficiency in the world. Public school students. By comparison, the US ranked 31st overall. We have set the bar high for the nation, and we continue to exceed it for ourselves. We have always been a leader in public education for our country and for our world. Yet today, this system is under threat of disappearing forever. For the sake of our students, for the sake of our teachers, for the sake of our legacy, and for our country, we cannot allow the great work started by our Bay State ancestors almost 200 years ago to be undone today. That is why we are here today. We are here to learn about our terrific public schools and how to ensure that they will be here for future generations. Thank you.
I didn't want to forget anyone, and I don't think I welcomed Jake Oliveira here from Ludlow School Committee, Paul Dunphy from Williamsburg, and I feel really horrible that I didn't say that Dan Hayes was here because I just had a nice conversation with him from the school committee in Shutesbury, so welcome all of you.
Our next speaker on tonight's program is Marsha Messer. Marsha is a sociology, that's me. Marsha is a language arts and social studies teacher at White Brook Middle School, where there is currently the concert going on. A few things about Marsha. One is that she's a recipient of the Grinspoon Excellence in Teaching Award, and she's also served on the Massachusetts Assessment Development Committee. And so I'd like to welcome Marsha to the podium.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm here to share a little bit with you about the East Hampton Public Schools from a teacher's point of view. We teach that in school all the time, point of view. Just did it today. I'm very proud to be a public school teacher and to be a member of the White Brook School community. We are a group of dedicated, hardworking teachers, administrators, support personnel, volunteers, and parents all pulling together to offer our students the very best education. In the East Hampton schools, we strive for excellence in each subject area while at the same time encouraging good citizenship and creating lifelong learners. At White Brook, we've adopted the Virtues Project. This project fosters academic excellence while creating a culture of social responsibility, integrity, and leadership. We have created an atmosphere of trust where kids are not afraid to take academic risks. We learn to recognize and to develop virtues that are honored by all cultures: respect, excellence, justice, integrity, diligence, courtesy, and courage. In the elementary schools, every student is assured of a great start on their academic journey. Our schools have recently earned a Level 1 status and are recognized as commendation schools. Our neighborhood schools offer preschool, after-school programs. We have Girls on the Run, multicultural fairs, a very high level of parental and community involvement, and we are instilling a love of learning at a very young age. These schools really are the place to be. We have a rigorous academic curriculum at the high school. Our students are being accepted at some of the finest universities and colleges throughout the region. Our students are proud to be graduates of the new East Hampton High School. We'd like to thank the bow ties that came here tonight. They're a tribute to our award-winning music program. More than 130 students in East Hampton are currently playing a musical instrument. We also have a vibrant drama program. If you have never gone, I encourage you to go and attend one of their performances. They are really fantastic. Some of our future leaders are participating in the Model UN. Others participate in We the People, and this year they just placed second in the most recent competition there. We have future engineers who are competing in robotics competitions. We have a French foreign exchange program. And this season, the varsity boys basketball team played in the Western Mass Finals at UMass. And I went to the game, so did a lot of you. And it was really great. I was so proud to see all the former students, the former players, the former parents, and a huge fan base from the city there to support the Eagles. It was great. In our public schools, we love what we do. We have a passion for teaching and a calling to improve the lives of our children. It is who we are. We understand the importance of education and the importance that local public schools have on a child's life. We know we have a long-lasting impact on the lives of our students. We know, as the educator and philosopher John Dewey stated, schools are the fundamental method of social progress and reform. In East Hampton, we have outstanding teachers. Most teachers I know go way, way above to ensure that each child is successful. We do not pick and choose which children we teach. It is our charge to educate every child that comes through our door, and we do so gladly. We have poor children, we have affluent children, we have children with great promise, and we have some that struggle to learn. We welcome kids in that are just beginning to learn a new language, and we help them through that process. Some kids have strong family support, and others are really left essentially on their own. It doesn't matter who they are or where they come from. We support them all, and we love them all. We really do. We do our very best for each one every single day. We all know that East Hampton is a city on the rise, and so are our public schools. I believe we are all in this together, and I know we are all better together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marsha. At this point, I just want to point out Chris Capucci in the back, so if anyone has any questions and would like him to collect it, this is a moment. Right now, I'd like to introduce Peter Gunn, who will be speaking next. Peter's wife is a local middle school teacher in the public school system, and Peter has been a supporter of education throughout his entire life. So I welcome Peter Gunn.
Thank you, Tamara, and thank you everyone for coming tonight. I'm going to try to give you an overview from my perspective as a member of the community and as a parent of two students who attended the East Hampton school system through 6th grade. And as Tamara pointed out, I currently serve on the school committee, but I want to be clear that while I will be benefiting from information that both the mayor and the superintendent and other school committee members shared with me, I'm speaking on my own behalf tonight. Horace Mann, a founding father of public schooling in Massachusetts, once remarked that education should be the great balance wheel in society. My concern is that the legacy of education reform in the Commonwealth may be undoing that legacy. And indeed, tonight, since part of what we're talking about is charter schooling, I'm concerned that as it's presently constructed, it is neither balanced nor social. Public education policy in the Commonwealth should serve all students well, rather than serving some at the expense of others. While well-intended and reasonable in theory, the actual practice of charter schooling undermines both equity and excellence in public education. I speak on behalf of the students in East Hampton to add my testimony to that you'll hear from plenty of people across the Commonwealth. Every community faces similar challenges in providing high-quality education for their students and their young people. At the heart of our mission is how to sustain and grow the quality of the schooling in face of these financial constraints, numerous unfunded mandates from Beacon Hill, and the flawed implementation of school choice in charter schools. Now, I'm going to try to sync up what I have here, what's here. The theme that I've put here is theory versus practice. There's a difference between the theory, which is very appealing, and the reality when we actually see it put into practice. So the theory is that charter schools expand choices, and who could be against choice? The theory is that charter schools help serve the underserved and at risk, and who would want to leave the underserved and at risk in that vulnerable space, and that these charter schools will be engines of inspiration, that they will inspire the public schools to improve, and that they will be engines of innovation, and they will share the wisdom of what they learn about education with public schools to help further that improvement. I would suggest that in this case, 1 + 1 is not actually equaling 2, that it's less than 2, and I'll attempt to show that in a moment. That instead of serving the underserved and at risk, at least as we experience it here in the Pioneer Valley, that charter schools actually are boutique offerings that serve the well-endowed, and by that I mean families that are more often resource-rich rather than resource-denied, and that instead of being engines of inspiration and innovation, they're actually enclaves of isolation. I would, as evidence for this, submit that you should read the front page article today in the Gazette, where the head of one of the local charter schools, in making an appeal to expand that school, identified the school as a niche school that served particular students, doing something that the public schools couldn't do in a way that wouldn't work in other schools, and asked to be able to discriminate on the basis of learning language ability in who would attend the school, all the while asking to expand. And this is what I draw from the Gazette, and I appreciate the Gazette for doing that article, although as I will add later, I think the Gazette could do a lot to help us understand charter education by actually looking at the data rather than having this conversation that we see on the op-ed page where one side claims one set of data and the other side claims another side. It would be great if the Gazette would step up and say, well, here's what the data really is about some of these controversial points. So the unfortunate reality in our greater community is that charter schools do serve families who are better off. And while some, they also serve students who are disproportionately less likely to be on IEPs and require additional resources. Some have even suggested that charter schools offer private education at public expense. And as a result, our community schools are left with students, as Marsha so eloquently put it, we take everyone who comes and we do what we can to help everyone learn and grow, but we do so with fewer resources than we had before. And for those who suggest that we should mimic the boutique offerings of the charter schools, I suggest that they provide the financial model by which we could do that on the scale of the constituency that we serve. Could we go to the next slide? So I just wanted to show you the budget realities that we face in East Hampton. It's a great community here of over 16,000 people. We're a diverse community. We're a fiscally conservative community. I mean, I would even say fiscally responsible is a better term. The East Hampton educators strive. I've witnessed it with my own children. I've witnessed it in my many visits to the high school where I work closely with the We the People teacher that Marsha was talking about, the finest history teacher, Chris, in the city of East Hampton. We all see the evidence there, but it's done with these constraints. And I don't want to suggest that the budget reductions that you see are exclusively a product of charter schools. They're also choice schools, although as you'll see in the next slide, if you would go to that slide, thanks, this one, and I apologize for the reproduction here. It may be difficult for people to see, but what I want to point out is that in East Hampton, the numbers on the question of choice have begun to turn around at the same time that the numbers in terms of charter have begun to explode in ways that put us under great financial pressure. So this shows you first what it has cost the city of East Hampton to send students to the 5 charter schools under the current funding formula, and the impact that it has had in terms of the loss of teachers that we have experienced over the last 4 years. I also want to point out that I am not criticizing the families who make decisions, as we all do, with the best interests of our children in mind. I'm finding fault with those who've created a law that forces families to choose between what they know is good for them and what they know is good for their community. It's, I don't know whether we should call that Sophie's choice or a moral hazard, but either way, it's not good to build something like that into legislation. And I think one of the best reforms that we could make would be to allow families to make a decision where what's good for their own family is also good for the community that they live in. But as an example, the typical real estate bill in East Hampton is less than $3,500. That when a student leaves to attend a charter school, that means in effect we're paying that family to live here. Because in addition to the educational services that they would have, the roads that are constructed and maintained and plowed, the police services and the emergency services, all of those services, the cost of those have to be borne by the other taxpayers in the community because there's a net outflow of money from that family. So again, it's not to criticize the family for making the right choice, but there is a social consequence to the choice, and this is why we should address the law. As I mentioned before, there's also a question about who is served. The percentage of low-income students in the community of East Hampton comes close to 40%. The percentage of students in our school receiving free or reduced lunch ranges from 19 to 32%. But of the students who've attended East Hampton schools and left to attend charter schools between 2012 and 2015, only 4 were eligible for free or reduced lunch. So it seems to me that charter schools are not serving the full socioeconomic spectrum of families in our community. 17% of families in East Hampton have individual education plans and receive special education services. 7 of the students who've left the district to attend charter schools are on IEPs. So it seems to me that charter schools are not serving the full spectrum of the learning needs in our community. And of the students who've attended charter schools in the last 3 years, 22 left East Hampton to attend a charter school, and 3 of those returned, but 68 of the people who choose to attend charter schools have never spent a day in our school system. The promise of charter schools as models of innovation, sharing their best practices with neighboring public schools, has not materialized here in East Hampton. With one notable exception that I'm aware of, there has been relatively little communication. We were told by a local charter school leader, well, that no one calls us to ask for what we're doing for advice. It seems to me that charter schools are not fulfilling the mission that led to their creation in the first place. I guess I would conclude, because I know the time is short, and I want to just suggest sort of a thought exercise for us as we're considering charter schools. If the logic of charter schools is carried to its conclusion, it seems to me that the model would be to shut down public schools, to divide the education budget among the families, and to allow the free market to provide educational services for the children in our community. But I would suggest to you, as someone who teaches both economics and history, that education is different than pizza, and that while we can rely on the free market to provide some goods, goods like education belong as the responsibility of the whole community on behalf of all children. It might make sense in the short run to create vouchers or a system like that in the hope that it would improve education for our children, but I think in the long run we would regret that decision and soon come back to the vision that Horace Mann articulated in the 1830s, that John Dewey encouraged us to carry forward at the turn of the 20th century, and that all of the good, hardworking teachers in East Hampton put into practice on behalf of our children every day. Thank you.
Okay, at this time, it's my pleasure to have Barbara Mataloni come to the podium to speak. Barbara is the president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association, and she'll be talking more about the issue of the charter cap. So welcome to East Hampton. Thank you for being here.
Good evening. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, East Hampton Democratic Committee. This is exactly what democracy looks like, and that's what public schools are about, is democracy. So it's fitting that this is what we're doing here. I also want to say I'm from Northampton. JP sold us our house on Dickinson Street, and it's just really always delightful. Since I've been president of MTA, I don't get to Western Mass very often, so it's just nice to be home. So thanks for having me. I do want to actually go back. I guess I'll step back a second. As I was listening to the other panelists speak, I really thought, like, well, they've already said it, and said it really well in terms of what it means for East Hampton. And one of the things is we talk about public education, and we talk about charter schools and their impact, that we need to be having conversations about what it means in East Hampton, or what it means in Northampton, or what it means in Ludlow. These are our community schools. As others have noted, Massachusetts is the home of public education, and with that, there's a profound vision that came with that. And I think it's important as we enter this conversation about how we're going to fully fund our schools and about the impact of charter schools on our capacity to do that, that we step back for a moment and really think about what is the purpose of public education. Why did Horace Mann say that we should have free universal public education? What was he thinking about, and what does that come to mean for us as parents, as educators, as elected officials, as students? And for me, it means that we have made a profound commitment to the possibility of democracy, to creating spaces for young people to enter the world and come to know each other, come to explore critical questions, use their imagination and their creativity, their critical thinking, to make community in a diverse community. In a community where people think different ways and have different perspectives and different experiences. Because we want our young people to experience that, because that's the world that we are hoping that they will both enter and continue to create. A profound commitment to democracy that isn't just about our elected officials, no disrespect, but is about how we live in our communities all the time. And you can't do that if you're selecting some people out to have two different systems. You know, Horace Mann didn't say, let's have free public education for some people, and let's set up another system over here where we use public funds and have two different systems. He said, let's have one, and the oneness is a critical piece of that. And I think in all of our conversations about education, whether we're talking about testing, or we're talking about charter schools, we're talking about funding and the sort of austerity narratives that are pressured on us right now, efficiency models, we forget to go back and ask that fundamental question. one of the words that I like most in our Constitution that references public education is cherish. And I think we want to think about what does it mean to cherish our children, to cherish our public schools, and in doing that, to cherish the possibility for our democracy. So we're here tonight, and obviously we've been doing a good job of that in East Hampton because we've got a full house. And that's great. But as others have noted, we're at a very, very perilous time for those possibilities. You've already heard from Peter about the current impact of charter schools on East Hampton. And those are real impacts. Lori was talking to me about what it means in terms of world language teachers. So we lose world language teachers so that they can go to a Chinese immersion charter school? Who wins and gains in that equation? As I travel the state and I talk to other districts and what's being lost, what I hear over and over again, paraprofessionals who work with our neediest students are being cut because of the funding losses from charter schools. We have so many districts across the state that no longer have librarians or have part-time nurses who come once a week because of the funds that are being lost to charter schools. So those dollars that we think about are very real dollars. And for those of you who are not from East Hampton, if you go to the massteacher.org website, we have a lovely map that you can click on your district and you can find out just how much money is being lost to charters in your district. And this is lost after reimbursement. So my home is in Northampton. We lose more than $2 million a year to charter schools. If you remember, a few years ago, the students in Northampton were marching to get their arts program back. And we have PVPA. And again, I think Peter said it really well. Like it's this bizarre choice that people are given. Do I take care of my own child? Do I take care of the larger community? Public education is about us as citizens saying our commitment is to the common good. When we're acting within the realm of our participation as citizens in a community, as voters, we are acting for the greater good in a democracy. That's a different kind of choice. So things are already bad. The pro-charter proponents, who include our governor, Baker, his Secretary of Education, Jim Pizer, who both come out of the Pioneer Institute, which is I don't know that right wing actually captures it accurately. It's a free market ideological institute that basically says that what it means to be human is to engage in the marketplace, and our value as human beings and our value as knowledge is about how we are valued within a market. It's sort of that's their ideology in sum. They don't believe in public education. Governor Baker believes in charter schools. He believes in a market-based approach to schooling. Jim Pizer is with him in that. They actually founded the Pioneer Institute some years ago. They are funded, they're supported by funders, Great Schools Massachusetts and Families for Excellent Education. Those sort of what we call astroturf organizations, sort of fake grassroots organizations, the reason they're fake is that they're funded primarily by billionaires. In particular, Families for Excellent Education are funded by hedge fund managers out of New York. And I'm from New York, so like no disrespect to New York, okay? But that happens to be where a lot of the hedge fund managers are. Who've been working very hard with success academies in New York City to undermine public education in New York City. We are under a profound threat by people who have billions of dollars, whose interest is not our interest, is not to celebrate public education, but whose interest is to undermine public education and create schools as a free market, which is contrary to Horace Mann, contrary to the values that bring us here today to defend public education. How are they going to do that in Massachusetts, the home of free universal public education? There's a ballot initiative, which will be on the ballot this November. Very likely to be on the ballot. We can talk more about that. And this is what the ballot initiative says. It's brilliantly written. When they're paying those millions of dollars, they're getting high quality thinking, right? There are two numbers in the ballot initiative, 12 and 1. And I think that's brilliant because they're small numbers. But what it would say is that we could open up to 12 new charters a year in Massachusetts. We would raise the cap. Currently, there's a cap on charter schools. And we are actually not even at the cap. But they want to say that we're going to lift the cap, and you can now open up to 12 each year, so 12 is the first number, and which could include, therefore, would educate up to 1% of the student population. So the numbers are 12 and 1, seem pretty reasonable. Well, in 10 years, we would have 120 new charter schools in Massachusetts. The way the ballot question is written, you could open those 12 schools pretty much anywhere you wanted. So Holyoke could have all charter schools in 1 year. Holyoke currently has 11 schools. Springfield would take, I think it's like 3.5 or 4 years. Boston, 5 or 6. Now that might seem crazy to you. Nobody's going to do that. Well, here's what you need to understand. New Orleans has no more public schools. After Katrina, our then Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, said, Katrina is the best thing that ever happened to New Orleans public schools, because now we can bring in charters. And 10 years later, there are no more public schools in New Orleans Parish. And you can invite someone to come and talk about the chaos that that means for the young people of New Orleans. That's the model that we are seeing. Los Angeles, right now, 35% of their students attend charter schools. That number, 35 to 40%, is what we see in places like Chicago, New York. This is a very, and this is when, if you're not like with me, this is when you go, Barbara's crazy. Okay, so just shake off the idea that I'm crazy. Open your mind to this idea. This is very intentional. This is a very deliberate attempt to undermine public education. And we know that because our governor and his Secretary of Education, Jim Pizer, have said that that's what they believe in. In the home, in the birthplace of universal free public education. And the reason there's this ballot initiative here in Massachusetts is because this is the birthplace of free universal public education. And the people who are looking to privatize our schools through charterization, pardon me, English teachers, I know that's not really a word, they're coming after Massachusetts very deliberately, because they know that if they can win this ballot question, that they will be able to charterize Massachusetts within a matter of years. And there's going to be a tipping point at some point. You see it even in our schools, right? What happens? Right now you're losing $750,000. What happens if that doubles? And suddenly you're cutting teachers, and you don't have your great arts program and your great band program. So what happens? People say, I'm going over to the charter school where I can get Chinese immersion. I can get my language program there. I'm going to PVPA where I can get music and theater. There comes to be a tipping point where the whole thing is destabilized. We can't let that happen. We absolutely can't. And you're all looking so serious, it's scaring me. But here's the good news. Here's the good news. We're not going to let it happen. We're not going to let it happen because people like your Democratic committee are organizing forums just like this. We're not going to let it happen because here's their big mistake, these charter people. We love our public schools. We're proud of our public schools. Yeah, we have problems with them. And don't get me wrong, there are major issues we got to deal with, especially in some of our urban centers where the legacy of racism continues to be present. But we care about our public schools. We send our kids to our public schools, and we want to defend those public schools. That's something that we know about who we are as citizens. So we're going to be working to fight this ballot question. And I'm going to talk to you a minute about how you can do that, because I'm actually really excited about this fight. And as I try to explain to people all the time, like, I don't get excited about things. Like, I'm not an optimistic person. I just want to be really clear about that. So when I'm excited and optimistic, it is not in my nature, okay? It is my nature to see the world with a very cold eye and be very worried all the time, and you can ask my partner about that, and then to go out and live with hope, okay? This time, I'm actually not only living with hope, but living with hope with a sense that we can do this, and we can beat this ballot question. Before I go to that, I just want to step back because I think it's important to have full information here. The Senate passed a bill last week relative to charter schools. How many people have some information about that, just so I can know what my audience is talking about here? And the Senate passed this bill, Senator Rosenberg, our senator, in the hopes of sort of fending off the ballot question. They're afraid to go to the ballot. There are problems with the bill that they passed. But here are some things that are really interesting about the bill. It acknowledges that we are not fully funding our schools. So it takes the foundation budget review recommendations, and I was on that commission, that said that we are underfunding our public schools according to our state formula called the foundation budget by more than $500 million. And it says we actually are not fully funding our schools. Unfortunately, what it also says is in order to fully fund our schools, we're going to increase the cap on charters. Now, I don't get that equation at all. I mean, I really don't get that equation. I don't know why we're not having a conversation about fully funding public education and voting for the Fair Share Amendment in 2018 when it comes to the ballot and saying we are committed as the birthplace of public education to fully funding our schools. But the other thing that this Senate bill does that's interesting, and I'll tell you this, the charter proponents hate it. They hate these things. You know what they hate? They hate that local elected officials would be able to determine whether or not a charter school would be opened in their communities and take students out. So they hate democracy, right? They hate that it actually, in the local control piece of it, says that a school committee representative would sit on the charter board. They said that would cause disruption and dissension. Jake, that's you. They hate that charter schools would have to serve a proportional representation of students who are ELL or have special education needs. They say we can't do our work that way, not the way those public schools do it so well. So it's a really interesting bill in the sense that it exposes a lot of the myths of charter schools, and that's why it's never going to get out of the State House. So it's not going to happen. So we're going to end up at the ballot in September. And we're going to win at the ballot. And the way we're going to win is by communities like yours holding conversations like this, where you get fully informed. And to go back to what I said earlier, I mean, we just need to hear from Marsha and Peter and Chris. You don't need me to tell you their story. Every community has these people in their community to tell this story about the value of your schools and the reasons that we have to vote no on this ballot question. I'm confident about winning because they overreached. One of the tricks they do with us about charter schools is they say, the boutique charter schools, they're like, okay, it's really those black and brown and poor kids that need charter schools, which, if you want to talk later, I'll tell you what a lie that is. And the sort of resegregation of our schools that we're seeing because of that. And it was interesting to hear Peter's analysis, the segregation in terms of class that happens with the boutique charter schools. But what they did by saying they could open 12 anywhere, that impacts everybody. And so those of us who've decided this is a Boston problem, guess what? It's not a Boston problem. It's an East Hampton problem. It's a Holyoke problem. It's a Northampton problem. It's a Williamsburg problem. It's a Pittsfield problem. It's a Westfield problem. And that's good, because that'll help us to really develop the kind of solidarity that we're going to need to win this fight. So the name of our campaign is Save Our Public Schools. And we are growing this campaign. This campaign, just a little background, is being, we have a ballot committee that has been formed to keep the cap. And our focus is to keep the cap, but our focus is also to do what Marsha did really well earlier, which is let's talk about our public schools. And let's talk about how well they do and how much better they can do when they're fully funded. Let's make this a conversation about our vision for public education and for fully funding public schools. So we need you to do a couple of things. First of all, grab a sticker and start to wear that sticker. And when you are in the grocery store, when you're in the doctor's office, some of you I see have public funds for public school stickers. You can wear those too, but we kind of like the new ones. Have a conversation. What we know is that most people don't know how much money charters are taking from their communities. So begin that conversation with people. That's how democracy works, one conversation at a time. Put a bumper sticker on your car. Not sure how the conversation works with the bumper sticker on the back of your car, but maybe after you've gotten into a little, accident, while you're waiting for the police, you could sort of say, "Hey, what's that bumper sticker? Oh, well, I was reading it, that's why I hate you," like kind of thing. But I think we can really start to spread the word, and in that generate the enthusiasm that we have for our public schools, because we have that. And you wouldn't know it from the Boston Globe. But we don't read the Boston Globe out here anyway, right? No. Springfield Republican, the Gazette, absolutely. The other thing we could have you do is fill out one of these forms, which says, what are you willing to do? You willing to get a lawn sign? Happy to go on social media and spread the word about this? Show up at a meeting? Canvass? Canvass? We like those of you who are happy to canvass. And before you go today, we have a social media campaign that's actually already been started here. It says, if East Hampton schools had the $750,000 charters take, we could. Take one of these, fill it out, get your picture taken, and let's start spreading the word about what charters are taking from us. And in that, have a conversation about the kinds of public schools that our children need, want, and deserve. Thank you very much.
Okay, at this point, I have a number of cards that have been submitted with questions. So some of them have pointed persons to answer, and some are just general questions. So the first question I have is for Marsha. I've lost track of Marsha. Marsha, okay. So Marsha, this first question is, I would like to know more about the Virtue program at White Brook Middle School.
So a couple of years ago, we decided that we'd like to change the culture in the school a little bit to be a little bit more loving and caring, and we recognized that we might be able to do this by explicitly teaching some skills to our students. And we started with the virtues, learning the language, learning to define and recognize and then name when we see somebody doing something kind, doing something brave, doing something excellent. And so the kids use it all the time to speak with each other in the classroom. And we've been trained as a staff. We are in the third year now, I think. And it just keeps growing and growing and growing. In my class, they talk about, they give feedback on written assignments. Kids will come up and read in front of the microphone and read their story. And the way they speak to each other now is so thoughtful and so kind. And they'll use virtues like saying, you're very courageous getting up there and reading. And they thank their partner for their diligence at work and their perseverance getting through that tough assignment. But the fun thing is what they do now. I don't know, I'm not sure where it came from, but when they hear somebody use a virtue word, and we have them up on the wall in the classroom, when they hear somebody use a virtue, they go ding, 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 ding. Like they just give them a little acknowledgement. So they love it. That's where we are with it right now. And it's just really spreading in the school. And I've had people I've known in the past come back and say that they notice a different feeling in the school. So we love it. Did I answer your question a little bit?
I just need to add on that one. I have one of my children is on the autism spectrum, and the Virtues program has been so instrumental with helping him be able to communicate with his classmates. And as someone who doesn't like to be very vocal, it's really encouraged his classmates to talk with him and get him involved in conversations. So just as a parent, that's really important to me. And the next question that I have is another parent question. What is your advice on how we talk to parents who do send their kids to charter schools? And this is a particularly important question for me as a city councilor. We are a relatively small city and a small community, and within that space that we share as a community, we have a lot of different schools, including a charter school. And one of the reasons that I wanted to be able to moderate this is to just, first of all, make sure that we're aware that we are an East Hampton community. Regardless of where our children are going to school within this community, we all live amongst each other. And regardless of whether or not the adults are speaking with each other, our children sure do. They share sports teams together, they share acting classes together, dance classes, and it goes on and on. So one of the first questions that I think we really need to work on is how do we all talk about this respectfully among one another and still be able to build from those conversations rather than building walls. So I would then like to invite anybody who's been on the panel to be able to also add your insight to this question. And repeating the question is, what is your advice about how we talk to parents who send their kids to charter schools?
I can tell you from practical experience how not to do it. So my position has evolved on this. Early on, I did have some fairly direct conversations with colleagues that made the decision to have their children attend the local charter schools. And I think I was hoping that providing information would help them change their minds. And then it didn't in some cases. But it is, from my perspective, important to provide the information. I think it's valuable for a family to know everything that's going on when they make the choice, and to be sympathetic and empathetic to their desire to do what all of us want to do, which is the best for our children, and to invite them to say, would you join even as you stay in the charter school for your family? Would you join us in working to change the way the schools are funded? Because I think that's an appropriate appeal, is to say, can we talk about ways where you can still do what's best for your family, but also do what is more in line with what we need as a community in order to sustain ourselves. So I do think having the conversation is better than pretending it doesn't exist, because it does, and I think providing information is helpful, and I think inviting people into the conversation about the funding piece. And even though I'm a little bit tired of people reducing this question about charter schools just to a matter of funding, that to me is not enough. It doesn't speak to the issues that everyone on the panel did. I do think that that's a palatable way to get into the conversation.
Did you want to add to that, Erin? Okay, the next question that was submitted is, why are there 34,000 students on waiting lists for charter public schools?
There aren't. That's the quick answer. Our auditor, Suzanne Bump, has been doing lots of research to actually try to get good numbers about who's on the waiting list. And we know for certain that there certainly are not 34,000. If you notice, they lowered it from 37. It was 37 in some response to the auditor's report. But one of the things that they don't like about the Senate bill that passed is that it would say that a couple of things need to happen. One is, if students leave the charter in the middle of the year, they'd have to backfill. We have words for this. Sometimes it amazes me. We'd have to actually open up that seat for more students to come in, right? Because right now they don't do that. Oftentimes they just take students at the beginning of the year, and then as they push students out and advise them that maybe this isn't the right school for you, those seats remain open. They also carry students on the waiting list currently for many years. It's one of the things the auditor has actually said, like, she just can't even get good information. But the same students will be carried for year after year, and the same student will be repeated because they might be in the lottery for 5 charter schools, and they're counted 5 times. So Citizens for Public Schools just released a report where they looked at the numbers the best that they could, and Alan Jalen from there is saying it's at best, like in their terms, 14,000, but he actually thinks it's significantly less than that. And if you go to their website, you can read their full report. But we can't even get good data. And one of the things the auditor says is she can't get good data about anything that's happening in charter schools. If they're as public as they claim they are, and I say just using public funds doesn't make you public, then how come we can't get good data about how they operate, about who's in their schools, about when kids get pushed out? So that was a longer answer than I started with, but short answer, there are not 34,000 on the wait list.
Thank you. Okay, the next question that I have is, when speaking about East Hampton as a, quote, city on the rise, and the objectives and goals of our schools and community, how do we do this in a way that does not denigrate East Hampton's longtime community members?
First of all, I just want to answer that because I don't like having the distinction, what is blue collar? We're all working, we're all professional in what we do, and we all care about our children. And the reason I asked you all to come here tonight is to see what we can do as a community to put the necessary funding into our public schools. I can tell you that I've taught in private schools, I've taught in public schools. I've been all around. I've taught with children facing me from all different backgrounds, colors, languages, and now in West Springfield, it's the most exciting career as a teacher to have with children from all over the world. I teach students that have left Iraq, and they're sitting in front of me now learning Spanish after 3 other languages. So in this community, I would like to teach, but we need to put more money into the public schools so we can bring foreign languages back down into the middle school, back to kindergarten where it never actually started. And I, years ago, had a nonprofit called Language Odyssey. And I was teaching after-school Spanish and French classes throughout the valley because our schools couldn't do it when it needed to start. So the Mass Department of Education said in 1998 in their standards that we need to start world language education in kindergarten. Did they ever fund that? So people who are leaving the schools here to find better districts elsewhere, well, you can tell them their districts are getting cut too because the money's siphoned. I was in a district over the bridge that had 6 world languages. It's now down to 3, well, 3.5, because you know why? Because they cut Chinese. The teacher I was working with was cut, but she works part-time now, so she can finish out teaching the children that started with her in middle school. They used to have, as I said, 3 other languages that were cut, but what's happening in Amherst, parents are sending their children to the Chinese immersion charter school. So the money was siphoned out of the public school, and the parents are sending their children elsewhere. So you can tell the people of East Hampton, as I am telling the people of East Hampton, that we do have wonderful schools. We have phenomenal teachers. We have dedicated parents. And we should all be working at this together to fight against this insanity of sucking more money out of our public schools and starting to create more charter schools. My husband and I each took a day a month ago, and we went to the State House. And that was an amazing experience because during that day, we listened to people testify to keep the cap. And I was kind of afraid because sitting in the audience, there were people that had to start more charter schools. They had matching sweatshirts and t-shirts and catered lunches. But only 3 of them testified. But the head of the NAACP was there, Barbara was there, but most importantly, there were students from the Boston public schools who left the schools to rally on the Boston Common and to enter in a dignified way and to plead for keeping their world language teachers at the Boston Latin School, where there is a waiting list. But Tito Jackson, their counselor, said that they're going to be millions of dollars short because of money going to the charter schools, and they are now having to dismiss a teacher in each of their departments at a public school that has a waiting list. Thank you, sorry. I'm very passionate about this, and that's why you're all here, because I know you are too. Thank you.
As I said earlier, for me, what constitutes public isn't just that the taxpayers paid for it, which is the case with charter schools, but actually that there's some sort of democratic foundation to how it's run. We have publicly traded private companies. That doesn't make them public. What makes a public school public, to me, is that we have locally elected school committees that oversee it, that there's a democratic foundation and root to that, and that the people who are paying for the public schools have voice in what those public schools look like. So public money doesn't make for a public institution. Now, if you go and you look at the statute, it says that, but laws are often written to constrain rather than to open things up. So I would challenge that articulation of it. can I answer the other question before we go? So I just want to speak really quickly to that. And I'm speaking as an outsider from East Hampton, but as somebody from Northampton, and as a human being. I actually think we really have, I really appreciate that you asked that question. And I think we have to figure out in our communities, especially sort of under the austerity climate that we're living in, the growing economic injustice that we experience, and then the gentrification that's happening. I'm living in South Boston, the South End right now. I'm a part of that gentrification in Boston. I think we really need to have conversations about what does it mean to be a part of a community, and how do we all contribute to it and value each other within that. And I'm more comfortable challenging people. I mean, I think Peter's comments about how we talk to parents who choose charters, but I think we need to actually, as a community, do exactly what we're doing right now, which is ask each other, what does it mean to be committed to our communities and to public education? And you can have it over drinks and dinner with some people, and be careful about where it goes, but we need to have it as a community, like we are right now, and figure this out, because we either believe in the common good, and we're working together for the common good, or we've bought into the ideology that says we're all individuals out competing for each other. And we're making, and it's a bad choice, it's a Sophie's choice, but it's a choice. And it's a choice that maybe is more complicated to make as an individual, but I think easier to make as a community. To say as a community we're going to commit to public schools, and then invite others to join us in that commitment. So that's, but I really appreciate you asking that question. I think it's at the heart of what we're dealing with here. Thank you.
I'll briefly thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on, but as I said, we really have to work together to fight this. So if you could make sure to have your signs filled out and take a picture, that is really a call to action, what we can do to try to start working together. But I'd like to thank all of you for being here, but especially thank our panel guests, Barbara Mataloni, Tamara for being the moderator, Peter Gunn for his fantastic presentation, Marsha Messer must be there somewhere, and
Chris Capucci.
And Chris, where's Chris? Chris Capucci with his beautiful Isabella over there. And to the subcommittee and to all of you for coming out tonight. But please, if you're in other communities, spread the word, do the same thing. Thank you.